So this is the brand new Samsung Galaxy Z Flip5. And in my previous video when I reviewed it, someone asked me to compare it to the Galaxy S23. One person, no more than one. And I thought this was a good idea because these phones are different in a lot of ways. One's cheaper, one's more expensive, and I think it's a very good life lesson because you're spending more to get less in a lot of ways. Whereas this S23 is less than $900 for the 256GB model, and it gives you more. Now, the idea of the Flip is to take a big screen, flip it down into a compact size so that it's easier to carry in your pocket. And they've achieved that. It's a great form factor, especially now with the hinge being perfectly flat. In fact, I have another Z Flip5 here. This is what the black version looks like to this green version, in case you were curious on what color to get. But it's a heavier phone. You know, like we're talking about 180-ish grams compared to 160. And when I look at this phone, I never once felt that this was heavy. Like none of these phones are super heavy, but when you're holding both of them in your hand, you can feel the weight difference between these two devices. Like the S23 does feel much lighter. And the idea of the Flip is to have this cover screen to basically cover yourself in certain situations. Quickly check notifications, quickly send off a text message. The idea of flipping it open and taking a selfie of yourself using the rear camera, much nicer than like using the front camera on a typical candy bar phone. And it has its benefits, but you don't need a cover screen on a phone this small. Like your main display is always your cover screen, right? And because it's so small, it just works as well. Now, the idea of having a flip phone is they can't really put a in-display fingerprint sensor on that. And I'm totally okay with this. You know, like this physical button on the right-hand side, so much better than an in-display fingerprint scanner. Like, don't get me wrong, like the one on the Galaxy S23, it's fast enough, it's in a good position. I don't have any major complaints, but having a physical one just works so much better. Now, here's the interesting thing. The displays on both of these devices share some similarities. They're obviously OLED, they're AMOLED, they get really, really bright. In fact, they share the exact same peak brightness of 1750 nits. But if you have both of these phones directly in front of you, this one looks better, okay? And the reason being is you have a proper panel of glass on it. And it just, have you ever looked at a laptop where you had a matte display and a regular glass panel? That glass panel always looks more contrasty, right? Like the colors just look more vibrant. And that's the same sort of idea here. Not that the Flip 5 is a matte display, but because they have a screen protector over it and it's not like 100% glass, you can tell that the colors just look a little bit better on the S23. Now, when both phones are open, they're obviously, you know, very easy to hold. They're not super wide or anything, but obviously the S23 is a lot more one-handable. The display is not that tall, so you don't have to travel too far up with your thumb if you want to reach the notification menu or respond to a text message. Not that this is long too, like I could do it with my long fingers, but it's obviously more comfortable over here. Both phones have stereo speakers, but I did find the Flip 5 to get a tiny bit louder, like maybe like 1.5 decibels louder, but overall they're fairly similar. The webcams are a bit different. Like we're talking about a 12 megapixel webcam on the S23 compared to 10 megapixels on the Z Flip 5. And I did notice a difference. Taking a selfie with the S23 did produce more pleasing results. The images were a bit more vibrant and a tiny bit more sharper. All right, so right now you're looking at the front-facing cameras of the Galaxy S23 and the Galaxy Z Flip 5. You guys let me know which one looks better and obviously which one has the better microphone. Now, the downfall to buying a flip phone is longevity, right? Like you're buying a device that has more moving parts, there's a hinge. It's not dust resistant, it's only IPX8. It's water resistant, but it's not rated for dust. Whereas the S23, you get both. Like if you're holding on to these phones for 4 to 5 years, I'd put my money on the S23 lasting longer. But they have the same Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 made for Galaxy, which is basically an overclocked version of it, and they both perform very well. Like I didn't find a difference in terms of overall performance between either devices. They're both very smooth. But the software experience is a tiny bit different, and that's because you can actually use Samsung DeX with the Galaxy S23 whereas you can't on the Z Flip 5. It's basically the only phone in the entire S lineup that doesn't support DeX. So if being able to connect your phone to, let's say, a monitor to have a full desktop experience is important to you, then the S23 is obviously the choice to go for. Now, battery life is interesting because they do share some similarities. Same wired charging speed, same wireless charging speed, and same reverse wireless charging speed. The difference comes down to battery capacity. 3,900 milliamp hours on the S23 compared to 3,700. Now, as I said in my Flip 5 review, the efficiencies made by this new Snapdragon processor is much better. Like, I can easily get through the entire day and not feel like I have battery anxiety like I did with the Z Flip 4. But I do get slightly better battery life with the S23. Like, if I was staying up late and I was going to a party, the S23 is more likely to get me through it compared to the Z Flip 5. Now, I'm not going to go through all the features that flipping a phone does provide because I think you already know if that's for you. Like, mainly comes down to taking selfies with the rear camera or using the phone in flex mode and having a tiny little YouTube video playing while you're eating your lunch. But again, you can achieve that kind of form factor if you just buy a case with the Galaxy S23. But the big advantage of going with the cheaper S23 is the camera system. Like, this Z Flip 5 only has two 12 megapixel cameras. One's a wide lens, one's ultra wide. Whereas on the S23, you have a bigger megapixel count on the wide lens, 50 megapixels. Then you have a 10 megapixel telephoto lens and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide lens. And look, the photos on both of these devices are good, but this is where the differences really occur for the S23. Because you have that bigger sensor, it can pull in more light, and I did find images to look a little bit more contrasty. There was a bit more sharpness and detail, not all the time, but usually there was when you're comparing them side by side. And that's important for some people, right? Like, maybe you want just a better camera overall. But the benefit of the S23 is having that proper optical zoom lens. Like, you can zoom up to 3 times, which in some situations can come in handy. But you can also digital zoom up to 30 times. Whereas with the Z Flip 5, there's no optical lens. You can only digital zoom up to 10 times. But the weird thing though was that video was pretty much identical. Like, I didn't find the 4K video on either of these devices to be any different. Like, they both looked really good, pretty much identical. But nighttime photography was slightly better on the Galaxy S23. Like, it was just able to take the photo faster. So for example, if it took 6 seconds with the Z Flip 5 on night mode, it took 5 or 4 on the S23, right? And with that, I got more detail in the shadows. The images, again, just like the daytime photos, looked a little bit sharper, a little bit more detail. But again, you have to really be pixel peeping. Like, the Z Flip 5 is holding up, but you can tell these cameras are just not high-end cameras like some of these newer devices that are currently on the market. And the cool thing is, both of these phones can do steady shot at QHD 30, but weirdly, I found that the Z Flip 5 was a tiny bit more stable. So look, these are both awesome devices, but if you're struggling for money and you need to buy a new phone, maybe you're on a plan where you have a good trade-in value or whatever it is, you're obviously gonna save more money with the S23 and you're gonna be getting more bang for the buck. In fact, you can probably get an S23 Plus for the exact same price as a Z Flip 5 and get a bigger display. So look, if you're carrying this phone for the next 4 to 5 years, okay? Don't go for the Z Flip 5, right? Like, it just makes a lot more sense to go for the S23. It's more durable, it has dust resistant, there's just less moving parts. And I think the person who wants the Z Flip 5 kind of has already made up their mind, right? Like, they want this form factor, they think it's cool, they take a lot of selfies, they like the idea of opening and closing the phone. Maybe it brings back some nostalgia from the early days of the Motorola Razrs. But if we're being real here, the S23, at the end of the day, is hands down the better phone and obviously the better deal. Now, if you have any more questions, let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.